Hello, and welcome to this edition of Dr. K's Psychobabble. Today's episode and a few episodes coming are the result of a question I got from a colleague and friend of mine, Tim McDonald, asking about the concept of intelligence. What does it mean? We got into this really great discussion the other day about multiple intelligence, looking at Howard Gardner's theory. How does that relate to IQ? And then, of course, Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence that I introduced into the conversation. Happens to be my favorite model. So I decided that what I would do to satisfy a very curious question out there about what intelligence is that I would do a series of videos. And this is the first of those. And we're going to look at some of the way in which the ancients talked about intelligence, and then the first sort of psychological adventures into the world of intelligence, this particular aspect of our personalities and our being that has beguiled psychology. It is one of those terms, along with the term personality, which I will cover eventually in these videos. Intelligence and personality are words that have actually entered into the common vernacular. I mean, we use these words every day, sometimes oblivious to the idea of the true complexity that lies behind the term intelligence and personality. But in this case, intelligence, when we think about someone and we say, oh, that person's intelligent, we have an internal model about what that means, and we say that that individual has those particular traits. We may have inside of our minds the idea of another person that we think is intelligent, but somehow they're intelligent in a different way. And this is the same quandary that is facing psychology. But how do we define this term intelligence? What do we mean by that? And maybe it's not just one thing. Maybe it's just not one characteristic that people possess, but it may be multiple things. And we'll see that later in this series, talking about the latest theories in multiple intelligence to kind of grasp a hold of the ways in which we are intelligent. So let's go back, step a little back in history, and take a look at what we used to think. So, Aristotle, looking at the origins of Western thought, Aristotle wrote about reason. Now, reason or reasoning ability is certainly something that we value in terms of a person's ability to understand concepts, make good decisions. The interesting thing about this is that this is an activity. There may be a capacity that somebody has, but reason is demonstrated. Certainly in the fact, when we look at the ancient Greeks, in the rhetorical argument, can somebody develop an argument that is reasonable? It's based upon facts, it's based upon a good delivery and whatnot. So the characteristics of reason, the first sort of manifestation of this skill set, let's say, under Aristotle, reason entailed the ability to rein in the passions. Like, I might feel strongly about something, but I need to be able to be reasonable. I need to be able to stay in my reason and not overreact or get all emotional about the point I'm trying to make. We resist the instincts to drive to our own selfish needs, and reasonable people participate in, dialogue and activities in their lives that are not just necessarily to the benefit of themselves, but of society. And you can see some of the philosophy of Aristotle coming through, that the function of the mind is to come up with reasonable solutions to human problems that benefit all. Today, we would probably look at this particular characteristic through the lens of emotional intelligence, or just EQ. Emotional intelligence is a type of emotional characteristics that allows us to work within the field of emotions, to understand them, to to understand how they manifest in others, to understand our own emotions and what they mean in terms of our thinking and reasoning and decision making and all that stuff. And we see that more akin to Aristotle's view of reason, this notion of being able to rein in the passions and be able to make a succinct argument, a sustainable argument for a particular way of thinking. And so this is kind of a not really what we would talk about intelligence today, but nonetheless really important. I mean, I have another video on emotional intelligence, and it is a vital characteristic of success, of doing well in the world in all kinds of endeavors. And so reasoning from the point of view of Aristotle, not only the specific abilities for that individual to be able to put together a good argument, but to rein in those emotions is certainly a part of the way that we talk about intelligence today. In fact, we'll see that portrayed a little bit in Gardner's multiple intelligence. We'll see that ability to understand your emotional state and the emotional state of others as a characteristic of his multiple intelligence theory. Now, as we move forward in history, we take a look at sort of the first manifestations in psychology about intelligence, and we come across, of course, the roots of this kind of thinking, and that is Charles Darwin. Now, Darwin recognized that in changing environments, species, and putting on the lens of evolution here, we're looking at this from an evolutionary perspective, beings existing within the world had to adapt to changing environments, and through natural selection, particular characteristics tended to sustain themselves from generation to generation. That's the whole concept of natural selection. And so intelligence itself, the ability to observe and make connections and all this stuff, all these ways, this was personified, or not personified, it was exemplified as animals developed greater intelligence, in particular human beings. That intelligence was the ability for humans to adapt better to changing environments than other animals. In fact, probably more than any other animal, we have adapted to living in all kinds of different environments under different circumstances, far outpacing our physical ability to do that. The creation of tools, the creation of technology, all of that has enabled us to surpass the physical limitations and become the apex species on the earth. And so when we look at this through the lens of Charles Darwin, we see he used the word mental powers to kind of generically talk about this concept of the ability to think. Process of evolution selected these characteristics in different species, primarily set about adaptability. And this is going to be an interesting characteristic of intelligence in the modern world when we look at intelligence as a characteristic that people have to be able to be creative and innovative in different situations. I'm sure there are individuals that you know that you call intelligent who the reason they're intelligent is because they're quick on their feet. As circumstances change, they're able to adapt. They're able to do different procedures in order to get to the same end. They're creative. These kinds of characteristics, we'll see these early aspects. You know, we have Aristotle's sort of emotional intelligence and reasoning. Then we have the adaptability of Charles Darwin's mental powers as they exist within all species, but particularly within human beings. And we'll see these themes continue to build and represent themselves in the modern theories of intelligence. So we look first here, we're going to take a look at the cousin of Charles Darwin, Francis Galton. These two cousins knew each other well, compared their work. Francis Galton was actually very influential in terms of Charles Darwin publishing his most famous book on species. And Francis Galton was an incredible thinker of the day, and he keyed in on the notion of intelligence and felt that it was represented by a person's ability to gain reputation and success in a professional endeavor, particularly scholarly ones. This is maybe a little biased. You could probably sense, this is intelligent people. The intelligentsia of the day are the individuals that separated themselves, particularly through scholarly activities and whatnot. And he thought that this was sort of the manifestation of intelligence. And we have to understand Mr. Galton in the context of what he was working on with his cousin's notion of evolution, and that individuals with high intelligence, manifested here by their ability to gain reputation and success in their endeavors, were actually the individuals who would be responsible for moving the human species forward. So, coming from a purely biological standpoint, Francis Galton felt that as thinkers and reasoners and reining in our own passions and whatnot, building on everything that we've talked about so far, he felt that it would be of use to human beings to be selective about who gets to have kids and who doesn't, because we want the ability to gain reputation and success in their endeavors to become a characteristic that gets repeated in our species. And so Francis Galton, despite all of his great thinking, introduced the concept of eugenics. Now, if you're not familiar with eugenics, eugenics was Adolf Hitler's kind of buzzword, going that there was a superior species of human beings, superior race, and that those individuals should be promoted to be representations of our race, of our species, and others who are considered less than should be shunted aside, and certainly, and in his final solution, we know what happened there. And so Galton has sort of a bad rap for introducing this concept of purposeful intervention in the process of evolution for human beings to ensure that the ability to gain reputation and success in professional endeavors becomes the leading characteristic represented in our genome. This is pretty dicey stuff. Eugenics gets a really gets that bad rap because of its connection to Hitler. But I'm going to say that, and I'm not in defense of eugenics at all, but we do pay attention to this through our process of mate selection. We kind of look at it from that biological point of view. And we do wonder, when we're meeting someone and we wonder, what's the future with that individual? There's a certain attraction to particular characteristics that each one of us has, and that is sort of the way that we sort of are selective in the way that we decide who we are going to be with and kind of what kids we would want to have and the characteristics that we want to have. And we pick characteristics in an individual that we like, and we hope that those characteristics pass on to our children. This is not eugenics. This is the natural sort of process of us selecting individuals with whom we want to have children. Galton's idea was that this would be managed, and looking at that from that sort of elite position of, scientifically manipulating the genome, and certainly we've moved beyond thinking that that's a good idea. So we enter in sort of this individual is actually famous for many things. Charles Spearman, an incredibly intelligent individual. And when he leaned in on the idea of intelligence, he felt that there was a single factor called G, or general intelligence, is what he was talking about. And that he wanted to be able to measure that. He wanted, that people have a quantity of this. And more quantity meant more intelligence. We have to really look at this from almost a physics standpoint. You have a beaker full of water, and some people just have a little bit of water in it, and some people have a lot. And Spearman was trying to figure out, how do we measure how much water the person has in their beaker, and the analogous to the idea, how much intelligence does somebody have? So Spearman was really into this sort of measurement of intelligence so that we can then take intelligence, grapple with it within the scientific method. To apply the scientific method to an understanding of intelligence by measuring its quantity. And we'll see that we move away from that and we talk about different qualities of intelligence, but here we are, this one factor. Spearman introduces the notion of general intelligence. It's a factor that we can measure. We want to measure and compare people, give them different scores related to how much intelligence they have, and see what's similar, what is shared among people that are intelligent. So it's quantifying this concept of intelligence, what we might talk about in the scientific method as the operational definition. Let's see, intelligent people, what do they have more of? When we characterize somebody as intelligent, and that's one of the ways in which he actually approached this. So you can almost look at this from a language perspective. So if we look at our language, the English language, and this is essentially what Spearman did, and he said, look at all the words that characterize something who's intelligent. Words like, I'm not going to be able to come up with a lot, but creative, innovative, responsive, flexible, all of these things, these characteristics. And what he did is he would have individuals identify words specifically for individuals who are intelligent in the English language. He then applied measures for all of those, measured them on intelligent people, and then did a procedure that he invented called factor analysis, which was if you look at all these words, are there some that group together? Like, say, flexibility and creativity. Individuals who were thought to be very intelligent, those two would go up and down together. They were correlated with each other. The individuals who were creative were also flexible. So he would put those together. He would take all the ones that kind of grouped together, and he would identify those groups of words as factors in intelligence, and he would come up with a generic term to describe those factors of intelligence that tend to correlate with each other. Individuals who were high in those were high in all of them together, and then those who were low in any one of them were low in them all together, statistically. And he analyzed this and created kind of the first intelligence tests that were measuring each one of these factors, what we might see as traits right now. You might have creativity, mathematical ability, reasoning, problem solving. We might see all of those. These are characteristics of words that groups of words that kind of correlate with each other and are related to each other and go up and down in terms of statistics with each other. And therefore, he would create this sort of measurement of different characteristics of intelligence, and then he could compare people. Now, this mathematical process is actually, truthfully, what Spearman is equally famous for. So, Spearman, in creating and researching the first of these measurements of intelligence, created the actual Spearman R correlation coefficient. That's the almost one of the quintessential tests that we use to determine if factors are correlated to each other. And he invented the process of factor analysis that we use straight to this day. And so we have Spearman coming along, introducing the notion that intelligence is a single characteristic made up of factors that contribute to that single characteristic. Each one of those factors can be measured with a test, and people can be compared based on how intelligent they are compared to others based on the factors that they have that are strong or weak. And so that kind of introduces, we're getting really close to this concept, this modern concept of what intelligence is. Now, when we look at these two factors, you have factor analysis and similarities. You're breaking up intelligence into its pieces, these different cognitive measures. Then Spearman looked at which ones are similar to each other and what do intelligent people share in terms of what characteristics do they have. All smart people have, these sets of characteristics. And this is really an adventure into what makes us the same, or what makes intelligent people intelligent. However, as the days go by, as history started to come by, we had to, the questioning changed. You have Spearman coming at it, operationally defining intelligence, working out its different factors, what makes people intelligent, finding those intelligent people, and then being able to describe how they're similar. Why do we use the word intelligence on these people? And this is how they're similar. That kind of understanding of intelligence. Now, what then enters in as society is advancing, particularly, as we're going to see in my next video, particularly as public education becomes more and more prominent in modern societies, we had to come up with a way to be able to distinguish those with intelligence and those without, and what kinds of intelligence they need help with. And we start this evolution of this idea as a tool, not only to simply identify what do we mean by intelligence and identify intelligent people, but to use that tool to identify individuals who would benefit from, let's say, remedial or special education work, and separate them out from individuals who would be fine with the regular instruction that is being provided in schools. So we move from finding what makes us the same, what makes intelligent people the same, into a characteristic, what makes us different. And this was important. It was important because it introduced an entire perspective within the field of psychology, and that is the study of individual differences. The things, not the things that make humanity all the same, which really kind of, you look at that sort of from reasoning to evolution to what makes us human. We're really that kind of thing. We're sort of separating ourselves from the animals. Why are we so different from the animals? The next phase in psychology, in terms of the study of intelligence, and really in the study of almost everything from this point on, was to identify the nuances of differences between human beings. We're looking within group differences as opposed to between group. Between us and the animals, how are humans different? And now we're going to get a little bit more deep, and we're going to get into some application. The first test, the first IQ test, which we're going to introduce in the next video, had to do with determining who is going to benefit from regular education and who would benefit from some special education. And we see that application of the concept of intelligence coming into play, and the further evolution of our concept of what intelligence is. We're going to introduce in the next video the concept of the intelligence quotient, or IQ. We're going to talk about the limitations of that, why we think it's like the thing to go to, and why we have a lot of emotional attachment to IQ scores. but we now recognize that they're limited, and they're extremely useful, but they're limited, and we need to be able to rein in. We need to be reasonable. Quote a little Aristotle. We need to be reasonable about how we use those scores to describe people and their individual differences. So stay tuned for that video, and we'll continue our exploration of intelligence there.